working. It's also the case for people who are studying. It's also the case for their teachers. And therefore, I'd like to call on Susanne, who is here with us today from her home, to present to us the resources that exist at European level for e-learning. Susanne.
Thank you very much. Yes, the Commission has published a web page presenting a wide range of online learning materials available at European level. With most schools, universities and other education and training sites closed at the moment, online learning materials help to continue education and training. The website includes very well-known portals like eTwinning and others, but also presents lots of material produced by Erasmus Plus projects during their work. And you see one in this tiny screen on the picture. The presented website and learning resources cover all education and training sectors. Commissioner for Innovation, Research, Culture, Education and Youth, Maria Gabriel, said, while the coronavirus crisis is causing disruption to education, training and mobility opportunities in the European Union and beyond, we must ensure that it does not hinder learning. And with this experience in mind, also the experience now lots of schools are making, universities are making and so on, the upcoming review of the Digital Education Action Plan this year will further support the development of online learning across Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Susanne. Then last announcement for me today. We are seeing across Europe extraordinary marks of solidarity among member states, be it on the treatment of patients, be it on the repatriation of EU citizens stranded abroad, or protecting healthcare workers by sending protective equipment. So to provide an overview and honor these tokens of solidarity, we have prepared a fact sheet which you can see behind me and which you will find online as well. And we will, of course, continue to update this information as news develops and further examples become available. Now, with this, let me move to the questions that we received for today's midday briefing. We received, by the deadline of 11 o'clock, 25 questions, so I thank you for your continued interest in our midday briefing. We will start, une fois n'est pas coutume, with questions related to asylum, and I will call Adalbert to answer the question from Andrés Gil from eldiario.es. I would like to ask you about the right of asylum suspension in Greece, which is about to last for 1 month. What is your assessment of the situation, including any evidence of human rights violations? Do you have any guarantee from the Greek government to restore it? Why are you not launching an infringement procedure, etc.?
Thank you. A lot of different elements to this question. Firstly, our understanding regarding the situation in general at the Greek-Turkish border is that many people present on the Turkish side of the border have now returned into the inland back in Turkey. And generally speaking, the European Union remains in very strong support of Greece's efforts to manage the exceptional situation. This is also something that has been reiterated in the joint statement of the members of the European Council on Thursday. In this context, the Commission is delivering on our solidarity commitments to Greece, which is also demonstrated by the draft amending budget that we adopted last week. Now, regarding fundamental rights, our position remains, of course, that fundamental rights must continue to be respected. Any allegations of violations of fundamental rights must be investigated by the Greek authorities. And we remain in close contact with the Greek authorities in general to identify solutions that are appropriate in the current situation, in full compliance with fundamental rights and with the European Union legal framework. Now, concerning the legislative act suspending the lodging of asylum applications, this is something that Commissioner Johansson addressed with the Greek authorities during her visit to Greece earlier this month. And our understanding now is that the law will expire on the 1st of April, and we are not aware of any decision by the Greek authorities to extend this law. And finally, regarding the letter that the question also referred to, we will of course reply to the letter as soon as possible. But meanwhile, we remain of the view that the situation on the islands needs to be addressed very urgently, and we are working very closely with the Greek authorities to assist them in managing the situation. This includes emergency measures to address or to prevent threats to public health, addressing the situation of the most vulnerable, including also through relocation of unaccompanied minors in the context of the initiative that we announced earlier this month, and where we were expecting rapid developments, and other measures that are already being implemented.
Thank you very much, Adalbert. We will now take a question from Mose from the Brussels Times for Anna. Last week, the Council decided to open accession negotiations with Albania and North Macedonia. In both cases, the Commission is invited to submit a proposal for a framework for negotiations. The first intergovernmental conference should be convened as soon as possible after the adoption. However, prior to this conference, Albania has to implement a number of reform measures. Is the start of negotiations conditional on these measures? And does it mean that the negotiations will start first with North Macedonia? When does the Commission estimate that Albania will be ready?
Thank you so much for the question, Moshe. The Commission welcomes the EU leaders' endorsement to open accession talks with both Albania and North Macedonia. For us, this decision shows that the EU delivers on its promise, and it sends a loud and clear message to the Western Balkans that their future lies with the EU. As a next step, the Commission will prepare the negotiating frameworks for both countries. These negotiating frameworks will establish the guidelines and principles that will guide accession negotiations. The Commission expects reforms to continue in both countries. As you know, for Albania, the Council conclusions set requirements for the first intergovernmental conference to be able to take place, but work on all those areas is ongoing and well advanced. Given the current pace and level of commitment on reforms, the Commission is convinced that these conditions will be met soon. As to your question on whether it will be North Macedonia that will go first or Albania, as you know, the enlargement process is a firm, own merit-based process, and there's no specific dates so far that have been set for the first intergovernmental conference.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. I now have a question from Odile Harvey. Now we come back to the coronavirus crisis. So, Odile, Radio Nord Bretagne. Afin de répondre
in order to address the numerous calls for help from national health authorities, should the President of the Council and the Presidents of the Commission and the Parliament propose and encourage MEPs, civil servants and different staff who have medical skills to make themselves available to the health authorities of their countries of origin or countries of residence? Balash, please. Thank you. Good morning. Clearly, the European Commission, based on a fair cooperation between member states, is looking at the maximum levels of flexibility and in terms of availability when there's a request for members of their staff to volunteer in their countries of origin or to provide their support to national medical staff. Nonetheless, people with a medical profile are a very small percentage of the Commission staff. Thank you. And in terms of the Parliament and the Council, Odile, I think you need to put your question to those bodies in turn.
Another question from Obis, this time from Aminata from Agence Europe. progress that have been made in talks with voluntary member states to host reserve stocks from medical equipment under rescEU. What's the progress made on that? Let me stress, first of all, that this will be hosted by one or several member states. The member states involved will be responsible for acquiring the equipment, and the Commission will fund that up to 100%. For Switzerland, this will be the Coordination Centre for Emergency Centres who will coordinate this. The initial budget for the reserve at this stage will be €80 million. We're in negotiations at an advanced stage with several member states who are interested in hosting this reserve. We anticipate rapid developments in this respect over the next few days. Thank you.
Thank you. Then another question for you from Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung.
President announced following her call with Li Keqiang that China is ready to provide 200,000 N95 masks, 2 million surgical masks, etc., etc. When do you expect these items to arrive? To which country or countries will they be delivered?
Yes. What I can tell you is that we have been informed by the Chinese side that the supplies concerned will be ready for delivery in the coming days. At this point in time, transport arrangements are being made. And as President von der Leyen has announced, the supplies will be delivered to Italy.
Okay. There was a similar question from Aminata. So, Aminata, that is the answer to your question as well on this. Now we move to a question on Brexit negotiations for Dan. In fact, two questions. From Jim, what are the expectations for today's meeting of the Joint Committee? And what are the timings, please? Also, is it legally possible for the EU to request an extension to the transition period if the UK refuses to do so?
Yep, thanks Eric, and thanks Jim for your question. Indeed, the Joint Committee, that meeting will start later on this afternoon. There's an agenda for that available online. I would suggest staying in touch for the readout. It's just late afternoon, early evening for a readout on that one, but stay in touch with me on that. As for your question on extending the transition period, this is set out in Article 134 of the Withdrawal Agreement, which states that the Joint Committee may adopt a single decision extending the transition for up to 1 or 2 years. What this means in practice is that there would need to be a mutual EU-UK agreement to extend the transition.
Excellent, thank you. So you had a similar question from Lily Bayer from Politico, and one on the self-isolation of Mr. Johnson, Mr. Frost and Mr. Barnier, and whether these impact the talks.
Yeah, absolutely. What I can say on that is that contacts are ongoing with the UK, between the UK and ourselves. This week we will provide clarifications on our respective legal texts at technical level, and I can also confirm that Michel Barnier is, of course, in very close contact with all of his colleagues here in the Commission by telephone.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I move to the next questions, I would like to come back to the announcement which was made by Suzanne on the e-learning resources, to point out that the website which she was mentioning is obviously available in all official languages, but the resources which are made available, which come from all over Europe, obviously are not necessarily available in all languages. It depends on where they are. But the central website, which allows you to navigate through these resources, is available in all official languages. Now, I would like to move to a series of 4 questions that we received this morning, which all deal with the multi-annual financial framework. They come from Matthias Schiffers from Finanzielle Dagblad, from Roland Zietloff from DPA, from Marine Laouché from AFP, and from Esther Zaland from EU Observer. And the questions, which I'm not going to read out because it would take too long, but they deal with the announcement which was made in the statement on Saturday, which we issued, which President von der Leyen issued, on the fact on the fact that in the statement we mentioned ongoing work on the multi-annual financial framework, and therefore the questions relate both to the time frame for our new proposal, whether we have started working on this proposal, whether the size of our former proposal, which was 1.114% of GNI, is sufficient in view of the crisis we are facing, whether this new proposal would only deal with the recovery plan, but also, or whether it would also deal with other priorities such as the European Green Deal, and on whether the GDP base, which is the basis for our proposal, will be the proper basis for this MFF in view of the impact of the crisis on GDP, on the size of the economy overall. So what I can say to answer these questions is that, yes, obviously, work has started. This work has started, in fact, and was already announced by President von der Leyen last week in her press conference following the European Council. You will remember that during this European Council, the President of the Commission and the President of the Council were tasked with making proposals for a recovery plan. The President of the Commission has very clearly said that she sees a strong multi-annual financial framework as a key plank of this recovery plan. Why? Because it is clear that one of the main issues that we need to address is the fact that we have a cohesive return to normal and exit from the crisis, also from an economic point of view, and that the multi-annual financial framework is an excellent tool in order to ensure this, because obviously it allows us to deploy investments straight across Europe. Now, on the detailed questions related to the exact time frame, the size of the budget that we will be proposing, on technical questions related to how the GDP base will influence the proposal. They're all extremely valid questions, but as you will understand, this is work which is in progress, and we will have to wait and see what is the proposal that the Commission will put on the table before we can answer those questions. I will say one thing, however, which is very important. The President herself has made abundantly clear, and I already said here in the press room last week, that we see the European Green Deal and we see digitalization as two central elements of any intelligent recovery and any intelligent investment. And therefore, there is no contradiction between trying to spur investment and spur expenditure to help us get out of the crisis, and following the policy priorities that were set out in the Commission's political guidelines, and in particular the European Green Deal, digitalization, and an economy that works for the people. So this is on the issue of the MFF. There were also questions related to the announcements or the debates on how to get out of the crisis. I have a question from Silvia Martinez from El Periódico and another one from Nikolai Nielsen from the EU Observer. I will read them. President Ursula von der Leyen announced on Saturday that all the options are on the table. Does it mean that the European Commission is ready to study a common debt instrument? And given the time pressure, what is the EC timetable to present a new MFF? Sorry, that was linked to the previous question. And Nicola Nielsen, over the weekend, President von der Leyen described the Corona bonds in the German press as a slogan. I will stop right here. She used the German word Schlagwort. This has been interpreted by some as being a slogan, but what it actually means is a concept, a key word, and therefore it does not have in any way a negative connotation. It is a factual description. It's a name. This is what she was trying to say, and we need to see what are the mechanics, what is the reality behind this. The question continues. Why does the Commission reject the idea, and how does this position square with her earlier critical statements when it comes to lack of member state solidarity, etc., etc.? Now, we have issued a statement on Saturday, as Sylvia has pointed out, and this statement puts everything in context. What the President has very clearly said is, on the one hand, we know that there is a debate between member states, and that some member states have pointed to specific constraints that they face when discussing the issue of Eurobonds, Corona bonds, etc., etc. These constraints are there, and we cannot simply wish them away. They are part of the debate. As far as she is concerned, the central, most important element of this whole debate is to ensure that we have a cohesive response to the crisis, that we do not have a response that somehow would create a divide between member states based on their capacity to deal with the effects of the crisis. And that this is the basis on which he is working, which is why the multi-annual financial framework is such a central element of the recovery plan that we will be coming forward with. Apart from that, what we are saying is that all options are on the table. We need to have options which are both quick, effective, and based on a consensus among all the actors, and in particular the member states. This is the key to having a response that will be up to the challenges which the coronavirus crisis confronts us with. So this answers these questions. Then I have a question from Jean-Pierre Strobans from Le Monde. Jacques Delors a indiqué ce week-end.
This weekend, Jacques Delors said that the coronavirus crisis would be a death threat for the European Union if the European Union failed to show more solidarity. Many other commentators have said similar things, and they're calling for the Commission to act more and more quickly to overcome the reticences expressed by some member states. Does that mean that there should be a response from the President? Visibly, the list of decisions taken last week was masked by polemics and the failure to take decisions at the European Council. So is more vigorous action in the pipeline, and what's your response to Mr. Delors and to other commentators?
Merci pour,
Thank you for that question, Jean-Pierre. I think we've already provided some pointers by way of a response. What's true is that a number of crucial points perhaps have been rather submerged by the current debate. We shouldn't forget, and perhaps Marta will be able to revisit this, that the Commission has already over the last couple of weeks taken over 42 decisions, more than 42 decisions and sets of guidance which will allow member states to combat the effects of the crisis, and in particular that applies to the macroeconomic sphere with the triggering of the general safeguard clause in the Stability Pact. That allows member states to take various budgetary measures which will allow them, for instance, to support their health systems. And in particular, this has involved a decision to set up a temporary framework for managing state aid. This has allowed member states to notify and approve very many plans for state aid in member states at very short notice. This will be of direct benefit to companies, to workers in those companies, and that together, as Mauricio Centeno said in his declaration, these budgetary measures already represent 2% of European GDP. These measures in terms of state aid already represent 13% of the GDP of the European Union, and other plans could be presented by the member states. The Commission will look at those as soon as possible, whilst of course always bringing as much flexibility to bear as possible. And moreover, the Commission itself, with its own resources, has come up with a whole slew of proposals to allow flexible use of the European budget, in particular of the structural funds. The idea is to allow member states to reply immediately to the effects of the crisis, and in particular that involves using the Corona Response Investment Initiative. This will allow member states to mobilise 37 billion euros to respond to the crisis. So there was an immediate response on the part of the European Union institutions from the Commission and also Member States, the Council and the Parliament to approve the Commission's proposals. That will allow Member States and authorities, governments and administrations to provide immediate assistance to companies, workers, citizens and health systems. So saying that we're not acting quickly, I think, is contradictory. And then it's quite clear that we need to prepare for what happens afterwards. And as I said on Friday, this path is something we have to create, and I did actually express that in poetic terms. Caminanti non hai el camino se hace andar. And what does that mean? That means that everybody has his vision of the best way of getting out of the crisis and of rejoining the road towards a healthy economy. We have to come up with a consensus, because without that consensus, we will not be able to bring the European Union out of this in a consistent and solidarity-based method. It's only normal that there should be discussions, and we have to take time for debate. We've acted immediately to allow member states to deal with the immediate effects of the crisis. We now need to work intelligently on the basis of dialogue to come up with the medium-term strategy which will allow us as far as possible to overcome the effects of the crisis. We're in a democracy. Of course, there are debates. That's quite normal. I think that there should be debates. It's healthy that there should be debate, because it's thanks to debate that we can analyse the problems from every angle. What I would be tempted to say is that I don't really understand why we always call ourselves into question. The European Union has already been through many crises in its recent history, and in its more longer-standing history has always come out on top of these crises. And we're working to ensure that once again it comes out on top of this particular crisis, but it will be on the basis of its values. That is a set of democratic countries who are used to having discussions with each other, to dealing with problems, to contrasting different opinions, ultimately the aim being to find a way of acting together. And that's the basis on which we are working. So I'm convinced that we will get through this. The President of the European Commission and her team is playing a role in these debates. The role, first of all, is all the measures we're taking to manage the crisis. You see that here every day. And then we also have the preparation now of the relaunch plan. So much then for those questions. And then we have a more specific question on Hungary.
From Sandor from Euronews concerning Hungary. And a comment from Prime Minister Orban on Friday, saying that the European Union should not block Hungary in the protection against the virus. Is he right in saying that the EU does not help? Can you give me details, please, about what help Hungary gets and how? Well, I come back to the answer I have just given previously. Flexibilization of the macroeconomic framework allows Hungarian national authorities to take the measures they considered as being the most appropriate for the Hungarian people to fight the effects of the crisis. Secondly, let me remind you, as just one but very big example, that under the Corona Response Investment Initiative, Hungary will be able to mobilize 5.6 billion euros of funds in order to fund its health systems, fund the SMEs that require it, etc., etc. I would also say that we have been working extremely hard in order to ensure that goods and workers can continue to flow and to move across Europe to go to where they are most needed. And no single country, be it Hungary or any other member state, can hope to fight this crisis on its own. So all of the guidelines that we are applying, and which have been welcomed without exception by all the member states in last week's European Council, for example, on green lanes, on free movement of workers, etc., are there to help member states fight the effects of the crisis. So we are blocking no one from doing what it takes. We are, however, obviously vigilant across the board in all member states on the fact that we do this based on the standards that we have in the European Union in all policy areas. So then I have a question which is related. Apologies, I'm getting lost in all the questions I have. From Aminata, again, from Agence Europe. Ursula von der Leyen
announced that the EU was ready to organise a donor conference for a vaccine. Is that the sole aim of the conference? And do we know what date it would be held?
What I can say is that this pledge, this announcement was made as in the context of the G20 teleconference which took place last week. The objective of this online donors conference will be indeed to finance the research on vaccines, but also, and this is very important, the deployment, once we have a vaccine, the deployment of this vaccine in particular in vulnerable regions of the world, making sure that it is both easily available and affordable. That is that will be the objective of this work stream. Okay, then I have a question from Lily from Politico, which goes: the automotive industry lobby groups have called for an urgent meeting with the Commission President. Has she accepted, and when will the teleconference be held, if so? Lily, I can acknowledge that we have received the letter, but we are looking into it, and for the moment I have no further information to provide on this. Tommaso Galavotti from ADN Kronos also had a question related to the automotive industry in Germany, saying that the Center for Automotive Research at the Duisburg-Essen University is saying that the automotive industry in Germany is set to cut between 100,000 and 830,000 jobs in 2020 because of falling demand and overcapacity. And whether we are going to discuss with the German authorities the need for a massive expansionary budgetary policy response to the crisis which is available in Europe. Tommaso, I think that I have answered this question more generally in my previous comments on the fact that the President of the Commission considers that indeed we need a recovery plan. We need an economic response to the crisis, which works for the whole of Europe. Then I have a question from Jim Bronson from the FT on a related issue, which is for Marta. Marta, I think you are with us. Yes, you are with us here even. I'm getting lost in who's in the room and who's on who's on video. Good morning again. After last week's summit and President von der Leyen's comments over the weekend, what is the division of labour now between the Commission and the Eurogroup on designing a fiscal response to the crisis?
So thank you very much, Jim, for your question. So the division of work following the last European Council is very clear, and that was also confirmed in the statement that was issued by the President on Saturday. So the Eurogroup has been tasked by the leaders with presenting proposals to deliver a comprehensive response to the crisis within the next 2 weeks. The Commission will participate in those discussions, of course, and stands ready to assist if supported by the Eurogroup. In parallel, on the other hand, the President of the Commission, together with the President of the European Council, and in consultation with other institutions, especially the ECB, have been invited to prepare a comprehensive recovery plan on which work has started, as Eric already mentioned.
Thank you, Marta. We had a not completely related question, but which will still be for you, again from Tommaso, on, and I will summarize because the question was quite long, on the fact that the good state of the German healthcare system can be explained also by the crisis in the euro crisis in 2008, which would have led to savings in Germany in lower interest expenses in 2010, in the period between 2010 2020. What can we answer to that?
So on this question, what I can say is that the membership of the euro area has benefited all member states. So according to calculations by the European Commission, euro area governments have in fact made substantial savings when it comes to debt interest payments annually since the introduction of the euro. And this has allowed all national governments to actually redirect spending from debt interest payments towards more productive spending, and that includes, of course, the healthcare expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I have a question for Johannes, again from Lily from Politico. The Commission says it will only receive anonymized and aggregated data as part of its plan to use telco location data to map the spread of coronavirus. Why then does it refer to itself as a data controller when this is a concept reserved for personal data that can identify people? Techie question.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, quite a techy question indeed. Yeah, no, as I had the chance to explain on Friday, the exact details of the initiative announced by Commissioner Breton are still being worked out. But to recall, the data from mobile phone operators will be aggregated and anonymized. The Commission decides on the purpose and means of processing, and that is to analyze mobility patterns, including the impact of confinement measures on the intensity of contacts, and hence the risk of contamination. And will, of course, ensure the respect of the Privacy Directive and the GDPR and the security of the data. And I think there you have the hint.
Okay. Since you're here, another question for you from Lajlo Arato from index.eu, index.hungary. How does the EU fight against coronavirus disinformation? Where does the fake news come from?
Thank you, Eric. Yes, no, we are aware of an increasing number of false information about the coronavirus pandemic. We are concerned that some of that might also lead to public harm. In this context, we are in close contact with online platforms. Vice President Vera Jourova last Friday met the representatives of Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Mozilla, again, to receive an update on their actions. All these platforms are signatories of the Code of Practice on Disinformation. The Vice President supported the approach of the platforms, which is focusing on facilitating access to authoritative information and sources. This is, for example, the WHO or national authorities, while demoting or removing harmful content. Ms. Jourova also urged the companies to share relevant data with research and fact-checking community and researchers, as well as to work together with authorities in the member states and also closer with the Commission to fully enforce the new policies and to offer more evidence that the measures are working. The Commission will continue to monitor this very closely. In parallel, the European External Action Service has been working on analysing and exposing the spread of disinformation around the coronavirus outbreak from external sources and actors. The insights are shared online on the EU versus Disinfo website, and my colleague Peter had the opportunity to explain this in detail last week. It is important that all actors are engaged in ensuring the dissemination of reliable information about the coronavirus pandemic. The Commission, for its part, has already, since the beginning of the crisis, launched a coronavirus response website. And today we launched a dedicated section on fighting disinformation on that website, which is behind me indeed. So there we provide materials for myth-busting and fact-checking. And more information is also available in our daily news.
Okay, thank you, Johannes. We have two last questions. The first for Sonia from Lily again, from Politico. Last week, speaking to the Parliament's plenary session, Vice President Šefčovič shared some estimates about how many masks, respirators and ventilators will be needed weekly over the next 3 months. He said these numbers were shared at the college meeting. Could you please tell us more about these estimates and how they were developed?
Many thanks for your question, Lily. The Commission has been mapping out the production supplies in critical medical equipment over the last weeks. In particular, we are focused on masks and ventilators, of course, and the estimates of the production capacities of traditional industry, which were shared during the college meeting last week, represent only a sample of companies and which were surveyed some weeks ago. Since then, traditional industry has revamped its production, also through the help of the Commission and assistance, and new industries are also involving themselves in the retooling of facilities in order to start producing such vital medical equipment. Since then, we have also been opening, together with member states, new channels for imports of this vital medical equipment from third countries, and the Commission has organized several tenders of joint procurement. So we are putting really a lot of collective effort to make sure that there is no shortage of supply of those important medical equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Last question for today, which is for Stefan. From Philipp Sohr, Evangelischer Pressedienst. Should member states which are not yet massively affected take over patients from severely affected countries, such as Italy and Spain? And secondly, should less affected countries send more medics to heavily affected countries?
Thank you very much, Philip. As Commissioner Kyriakides has stated, this is a critical time for solidarity and cooperation. The Commission is really doing everything it can to get more help to Spain and Italy. This is for the Commission a top priority. Without solidarity or Europe-wide solutions, we cannot effectively deal with this public health emergency. And we do see a lot of solidarity. France and Germany, for instance, have sent masks to Italy. Austria is going to do the same. Germany has offered to welcome patients from regions in France and Italy where hospitals are currently overwhelmed. Luxembourg is going to provide support. There's quite a lot of examples of solidarity between the member states. Now, medical assistance between these member states is obviously something that the Commission encourages and supports. And the Commission is now in the process of exploring possible guidance to support such cooperation. Thank you.
All right, and we are showing on screen and will be disseminating information that we collect on these signs, concrete signs and deliverables in terms of solidarity between member states. Let's not forget the European Union is the institutions, but it's also all those mechanisms that have been developed over decades that allow member states to communicate between themselves and help each other also bilaterally. Let me remind you that we have very regular teleconferences between the ministers, for example, in the health area, for example, in the home affairs area, for example, in the transport area. And this is all conducive to member states understanding the needs of neighboring countries and others across Europe, and therefore then proposing practical solutions. So opposing, as I sometimes see on my Twitter feed, on the one hand the action of the European Union institutions and on the other of member states does not make sense. We're all one big family in this respect, and it's the efforts of the individual members and also of the institutions which make up our collective response. And that's how we will get out of this crisis together. Thank you very much. À demain.